7:30 this morning, we have got the panel discussion, a much anticipated panel discussion in the Al Jahara Ballroom, brought to you by DP World. It's going to be moderated by Faisal Abbas. You heard Faisal a little earlier on in proceedings. He's the editor-in-chief of Arab News. He's going to be joined by Hadley Gamble of CNBC, Nathan Tech, the US State Department spokesperson in the Middle East, and also our next guest, the director of the Berlin-based Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, Mark Donfried, has joined us from our broadcast position. Mark, welcome to you this morning.
Good morning. Very happy to be here.
Really kind of you to be with us on what promises a morning and afternoon of discussions, not more so than the panel discussion that you're involved in. Faisal was here on that very seat just a few moments ago. He was giving us a few spoilers, a couple of insights into the research that he's commissioned along with YouGov. The number that he threw out this morning was 81% of Americans can't point to an Arab nation on a map when it's put in front of them. Does that surprise you?
To a certain degree, no. I think it's about the same statistic in terms of numbers of Americans that actually have a passport. It's between 70 to 80% of Americans do not have a passport. So if you look at that as a premise, it's not such a surprise that, of course, about the same amounts don't also recognize, let's say, the geography of a region such as the Middle East. So unfortunately, it's not a surprise. And I think there is a lot of work to be done in the U.S. and also in the West, quote unquote, as well, really in terms of education. Not only the geography, but of course the religion, the culture, and everything else as well.
We hear constantly about the image of the Arab world, the Arab image as deemed by the West. Is there too much focus on that at times? Are we wrapped up here in the Arab world as to the way that we portray ourselves to the rest of the world?
I don't think so. I think one of the problems that I've observed, and many have observed, not only of the Middle East, but many other countries in the world, the perception of the country is very different from the presentation, which is very different from the reality. And I think that's a challenge that the Arab countries have, but also you could say every country has. And that's very much the job of cultural diplomacy, which is our focus at the Institute. How one can try to bridge the gap so that the presentation ideally is the same as the perception, which also actually perceives the reality. So therefore, that is a challenge I think every country deals with. So I think obviously one shouldn't be totally focused on the image, but it is very important. If our goal is to really build understanding and trust between the nations, between the countries, it is really important in that sense to also have the image that's accurately reflected in the media and also in reality.
I love these two words, Mark. Cultural diplomacy, so important. So how do we bridge that gap so that we can change perceptions about the Arab world?
The first step, of course, is awareness and education, and I think there the media has a very big role to play. That's why I'm so happy to be here at the Arab Media Forum. The media, whether we like it or not, has a very big role in determining what we're thinking about, when we're thinking about it, and how we prioritize that. So therefore, it's a very big responsibility, and I think that's the first step. Raise awareness to the issues, raise education as much as possible, and then the next step right after that would be, of course, exchange. The more exchange between those 70 or 80% of Americans that don't have a passport and Arabs, the harder it's going to be to convince them that this civilization or this group is like this or this group is like that. So awareness, education, and exchange.
Media is changing though. I mean, we just spoke to Twitter. Earlier we were talking about newspapers and whether publishing is dying. What impact is that having in the messages we are sending about cultural diplomacy?
The good news is we have more opportunities now to educate ourselves. There's many more media outlets in terms of the official media and also the unofficial media, social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc. The key thing is we have to make sure we're using it correctly. I remember in the past, very proudly, American diplomats or German diplomats would show me their business cards with their Twitter account and their Facebook pages, how modern they were. The problem was they were using social media wrong in the sense they were writing on Facebook, they were sending tweets, they weren't necessarily reading Facebook or receiving tweets, and it's a two-way street. So if we want to, let's say, predict the next Arab Spring or whatever it is, we need to also use the social media differently and, of course, be aware. We can't believe everything necessarily we read, but constantly every day to try as best as we can to surround ourselves with as many perspectives, as many different sources as we can to make a more educated decision about a certain situation.
Fascinating you mentioned that as well. It goes back to that whole thing of listening, doesn't it? Because we're all very ready to give our opinions on social media at the moment. And in that, is there the element of responsibility? You talk about cultural diplomacy in general as well. Are we all becoming diplomats in our own right in the way that we're in what we're saying on social media at the moment?
Definitely. I think one of the major shifts that we're trying to actually help bring to the field of culture diplomacy is to more or less take culture diplomacy and stand it on its head. In the past, culture diplomacy was about speaking. I want to send my movies, I want to send my music, I want to tell you about my country. Much more important, however, if I want to build trust, is listening. As the former foreign minister of Mozambique once told me, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We need to do twice as much listening. That's the first step. I would argue for culture diplomacy, or for human beings. Once we go to a place, just to go and listen, show the respect, get to know the local situation, and then step by step where appropriate, of course, it should go the other way as well. And there should be a 2-directional exchange or multi-directional exchange. So definitely listening is the first step, is an essential step. Come with humility, come with respect, recognize our own imperfection, and then a real dialogue, as you said, where listening can take place. Not just hearing, but really a sincere listening in both directions. That's the best way, I would say, to come to that understanding and hopefully over time, trust.
Mark, with that though, comes with an open mind. There's a lot of people, we could say, in the time that we're living in now, that are shut off to certain things. There's so many stereotypes out there. There's fake news, there's misconceptions. Talk to me about the importance of being open-minded when you travel to a new country or expose yourself to a new culture.
No, of course. I think there, as I said, humility is the first step, and to recognize as a human being ourselves as an individual, as well as part of a group, whether I'm part of a religious community, part of a national community. There's so many different layers of our identity. And I think we are in a time where it seems like we're getting more and more extreme, whether it's extreme Republican, extreme Democrat, extreme Brexit, extreme anti-Brexit, all of this. And I think there it does seem to be getting more extreme there. So the first step, of course, is to try, even if I'm a really devout Catholic or a really devout Muslim, to recognize the imperfection also of my own interpretation of whatever the book or whatever the religion is. That will allow me to have a certain openness. That doesn't mean I have to tolerate or accept everything necessarily, but to at least have a certain humility with my own identity. It's not always possible, but of course, if it is possible, that's the foundation we need. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to have a dialogue when I'm absolutely sure of this and you're absolutely sure of that.
We've seen in the past, and history teaches us, that hard power has had tragic sort of consequences in years gone by. Are we seeing a sort of a softening of the edges, not just of power, but in general at the moment? We're seeing a move towards soft power as opposed to hard. Is that the way forward?
I think what we've realized, let's say the last 8 years, last 12 years, you could say post 9/11, post Arab Spring, hard power itself doesn't work.
Right.
Hard power tends to be destructive, and soft power tends to be constructive. On the other hand, soft power alone also won't work. Unfortunately, we need both. So the so-called smart power that Clinton and also Obama would so profoundly refer to is definitely the answer. What smart power looks like is, of course, the question, and it depends case by case. But I think, yes, there is a softening. There's a recognition we need both. But I just want to also point out, cultural diplomacy, the most successful forms that I've found are actually not part of soft power, but really those more pure interactions where really groups come together just to play soccer or just to build a homeless shelter or just to volunteer without a governmental agenda, without being part of power, of me wanting something from you or you wanting something from us. So yes, soft power definitely is preferable to hard power. We are recognizing we need both the smart power, but I would also just like to underline those forms of cultural diplomacy that take place outside of the soft power umbrella can even be more effective. Neutrality never exists, but I think the more closer we are to neutrality, the more successful we probably will be.
I'm glad you've said that because I've never really sort of understood soft power. I've never really understood whether... I know it's a buzzword. I know it's a phrase that gets bandied around a lot in the media and it's been used a lot. But as you say, it's quite difficult to quantify it, isn't it? And what soft power achieves and what it will achieve.
That's why usually it's less attractive for politicians. It's much easier to have hard power. I can show, okay, in these 4 years, I did this and this, re-elect me. Soft power, we have to wait too long. Everyone recognizes academic exchange can be amazing and have wonderful rewards, but it takes too long. We have to wait for the students to graduate, to get a job, to move ahead in their careers, then we can start to see. So you have to be patient. It's much harder to quantify, and usually the time frame doesn't connect so well with the cycles we live in, whether it's 4-year political cycles, elections, re-elections, etc. That can be the attractiveness of hard power. I can show today that I took over the city, or I took over this country, or I did A, B, and C. So that's, I think, a fundamental challenge of cultural diplomacy and soft power.
Just this week, Our Highness Sheikh Mohammed was talking about the importance of soft power. Partly, it's tourism to the region. It's your first time here, Mark. You've never been to Dubai before. What have your first impressions been, and what is the story you're going to tell when you go back to Berlin?
Of course, the first impressions are, of course, the city itself in terms of the structure, the amazing architecture, and of course, it's very, very impressive to see in the last 6 years what's been done, the last 10 years what's been done, the last 20 years. So that, of course, is the first impression. Second impression is, I think, the tremendous diversity and really multiculturalism, which is so unique in Dubai. I think it's really international in a much more extreme way, where here the majority is actually coming from outside of the Emirates as opposed to inside, and that's a very unique thing, coming from Germany or the USA, etc., where it tends to be the opposite. So I think that's a power and also an asset that Dubai and Emirates have, to really show this mixed salad of multiculturalism, so to speak, as opposed to a melting pot where everyone melts into this similar soup. So that's an asset that I don't think Dubai has yet really maximized on. So I think that's an exciting potential and an exciting soft power potential that I think Dubai and the Emirates has.
Events like this are certainly pushing the boundaries when it comes to that, bringing together international, globally recognized and respected voices to air their opinions as well. We know that opinions count for everything. We've been talking about tolerance this morning. We've talking about happiness, etc. That all works. So there's been an air of optimism here, certainly over the last 24 hours into today. From your standpoint, though, Mark, and looking at cultural diplomacy as a whole and the Arab image in the West, as you'll be discussing shortly, what's the biggest stumbling block at the moment? What's your biggest concern, the biggest shadow out there that could cause problems?
So in a general global sense, the answer to your question, I would say, really is trust. As I said, the main goal of cultural diplomacy, we need to enable that trust. What two countries in the world sincerely trust each other? In terms of at the highest level and in terms of civil society, very difficult. Even the European Union, where everyone said, great, 28 countries, never going to have problems again, is also it's seemingly crumbling apart. Who would have seen Brexit coming? Who would have seen President Trump coming? I think now anything is possible. What's going to happen in France? I don't know. Anything could happen in France. And I think to come to that point, we're all really surprised. So therefore, I would say, as simple as it is, I think this issue of really building that trust and fostering that trust between nations, between peoples, is the most essential. Then we can work together, and then we cooperate, and then we can deal with whether it's refugees, climate change, or whatever the challenge is. Without that trust, it's going to be very difficult also for trade, for tourism, and for business.
And just the same carry through to nations as well, because I hear the word diplomacy, I suddenly think international diplomacy, I suddenly think two nations talking to each other, and yet, as you quite rightly point out there, nations have problems within their own nations at the moment. I'm from the UK and we have exactly that. We're going to take a short break.
This is The Agenda.
Live from the 2017 Arab Media Forum at Madinat Jumeirah.
Dubai Eye News.
In association with Do.
Thanks, Tom. Coming up locally, the Abu Dhabi Judicial Department has warned regarding in a shooting in Cairo. And in sport, Tyson Fury claims he could beat fellow British boxer and heavyweight world champion Anthony Joshua with one hand tied behind his back. All that and more coming up at the top of the hour.
When you turn on the TV, most of your favorite shows are pre-recorded or are repeats.
But most of what's broadcast on air on radio is live.
This means radio operates in a constantly changing and developing environment. Every hour of every day, radio produces fresh, new, live content for you.
It's one of many reasons why we love radio.
For more information, visit weloveradio.ae.
The Ticket, 1 to 4 weekdays. Travel.
We went to all the little islands. We started off at Bali, and then we went to Seram. We went to Irian Jaya, and then we ended up in the Banda Island, Banda Nira, the natural island where the first spices came from, in the 1400s.
What's happening in town?
Mary Poppins is very eclectic in its ideas and its choreography. It requires the dancers to be extremely versatile. So you do get a big full-out tap number, which is the step-in-time number. You also get a bit of balletic material in there, in the Jolly Holiday number. There's some old vaudeville.
And the daft stuff.
So, Stephanie, a big day for you. Just tell us exactly, why it's so special.
Well, it's first of all, can I just say I'm intimidated by the size of your microphone.
It's a beauty, isn't it? Yeah.
The Ticket, taking you places. Only on Dubai Eye, 103.8.
What could you do with an extra $1,000 or even $1,500 a month? Will that help you take care of some of your commitments? You could turn your dreams into reality by trading and investing in the markets. Now, before you say, oh no, that's not for me, just hear us out. We want to invite you to our half-day training course so that you can check this out for yourself. Call Online Trading Academy, 800-OTA. That's 800-682.
This is The Agenda.
Live from the 2017 Arab Media Forum at Madinat Jumeirah.
Yeah, indeed. About to wrap things up down here from our broadcast at this year's Arab Media Forum. Not before we've concluded our conversation with Mark Donfried. Mark is the director of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy based out of Berlin. He's here at the Arab Media Forum for the first time. Mark, sorry, we interrupted you there with a rude interruption. You were just about to tell us about the difference about cultural diplomacy from an international perspective as opposed to what is an ongoing risk for so many nations around the world, diplomacy within your own nation. Is that something we should be cognizant of?
Definitely. The Institute for Cultural Diplomacy purposely writes our corporate identity in lowercase because we're trying to look at the formal as well as the informal forms of cultural diplomacy. Definitely it's relevant within a country, within a city, even within two groups living on the same street in the same block. And I think in that sense, this idea of establishing the dialogue, understanding, and trust, very, very important. Germany is a great example where the whole demographics of Germany are totally changing now with refugees, etc. So this question, what does it mean to be German in terms of identity, very, very important. Just like I'm sure in Dubai or in the Emirates, how does one define national identity? How does one play effectively as a team, as a whole?
It's a fascinating subject. It's one that will be discussed in detail in just a little while down here at the Arab Media Forum. The Arab Image in the West, US in Focus, is at the Al Jahara Ballroom. Mark Donfried will be part of the panel moderated by Faisal Abbas. Voices, opinions from all over the globe coming together on that particular panel. Are you looking forward to it?
Definitely. So an excellent opportunity, and I look forward to learning as well as to hopefully offering some reflections.
Well, we really appreciate your time here this morning. I know you're going to head off to the green room now. Get yourself into the zone out for exactly that. Really appreciate your time and your insight this morning. It was fascinating, and thank you very much indeed.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
That was Mark Donfried there, director of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy based out of Berlin. As I said, he's on the stage at 11:30 this morning. The Arab Image in the West is just one of a whole host of seminars that are being conducted down here at the Arab Media Forum. Day 2 of proceedings from the Arab Media Forum, and plenty for us to get our head around.